My name is Philip Cheek. I was born in Somersetshire, England on May 11th, 1841. My parents, Philip and Hannah Cunningham Cheek, came to the United States in 1852 when I was 9 years old, first settling in New Jersey, later moving to Providence, Rhode Island, and in 1856 coming to Wisconsin. We settled on a farm in Excelsior Township of Sauk County. I enlisted in the Union Army on May 10th, 1861, in Company A of the 6th Wisconsin Infantry. In December of 1862, I was granted an honorable discharge because of injuries I received in the Great Battle of Antietam on September 17th, 1862. I returned to the old Wisconsin farm. In the fall of 1863, I was appointed Assistant Provost Marshal of the district, which is the head of the military police. I served in that position until the close of the war. Appomattox. On Sunday, April 9th, we got up at daylight but did not move out till after sunrise. We marched along the railroad. During the morning, we could hear cannonading in front of us. The news was passed along that 20,000 rebels had surrendered. It seemed too good to believe. The firing had ceased at the front. We were halted and went into camp and pitched our tents, something we had not done for a long time. In the afternoon, we saw an officer come riding down the lines, his horse wet and covered with lather. As he passed along, we saw that the boys' caps went up into the air. The welkin rang with cheers. We knew that he bore glad tidings. As he came in front of us, he shouted, "General Lee and Army have surrendered to General Grant." Cheer! Oh no, we yelled for joy. We knew the war was ended. They made a splendid and heroic fight for what they firmly believed to be right, and lost. The victors that had as firmly believed they were right had said that this nation should remain one, not two, and they bowed to the will of the majority, and most of them accepted the result as final. General Lee's army was paroled and sent home. Nothing was done to cause humiliation to the veteran army of Lee. We divided rations with them, and when they left us, the most friendly feeling existed between the men of the two armies. They all got away by the 13th. When the North and the South Carolinians passed our camp on their way home, our boys lined up and cheered them on their way. They bade us goodbye and wished us a speedy and safe return to our homes. We wished them Godspeed and safe return home. It was the end of a splendid organization of officers and men. One of them called back, "Y'all pick a row with Johnny Bull and we all will help you." And they would. Company A had the honor of furnishing the last commander of the 6th Regiment in its last engagement, and at the surrender of General Lee and his army through our captain, L.A. Kent, who commanded the regiment during the last campaign. Company A rang down the curtain on the acts of the regiment that made history, a feat not performed by any other company of any other regiment in the Iron Brigade. Captain Kent in a letter says, "As a member of another company in the same regiment for 3 years, I always had a profound respect for Company A and felt, as we all did, that when Company A stood, the line was safe and the honor of the regiment would be upheld." Sturtevant caught up with the company on the 9th. On the 13th, men cleaned up their arms and accoutrements, and the officer made out reports of the campaign. No one felt like work. The strain was over. Relaxation had taken the place of the highly strung nervous tension, that had possessed us the past 2 weeks. On April 14th, there was regimental inspection. Company A was found in good condition. On the 15th, we received orders to pack up and be ready to move at noon. On the hour, we moved out in a heavy rain, our regiment in the rear of the brigade. The roads were in bad condition and marching heavy. We marched 15 miles in the direction of Farmville and encamped. On Sunday, April 16th, reveille at 5 a.m., moved out at 6 a.m., marched on the railroad track to Farmville, a very hard march, where we made our camp. We received official notice of the assassination of our beloved Lincoln. We could hardly believe it. It cast a deep gloom over the Army. His taking off in the manner that he was, and just as the silvery line appeared on the dark war cloud that had enveloped his country, and which gave promise of a lasting peace and joy to his burdened heart, was particularly sad. It was horrible to contemplate the deed. The assassin would have been torn limb from limb could the soldiers have meted out his punishment. On April 17th, we packed up at 3 a.m. and moved out at 6 a.m. and marched on the railroad track past Burkeville on the Danville Railroad, following the railroad some 7 miles from the junction, where we rested 1 hour and made coffee. We then struck off to the right across country, marching until sundown, where we encamped for the night. On April 18th, we had a chance to obtain a good breakfast, as we had orders to form camps by divisions and raise our tents up 2 feet from the ground. Lieutenant Pointon was detailed to command a foraging party and sent out under the command of a major to procure some corn that was at a place about 8 miles from the camp. When they arrived at the place, the lieutenant was ordered to remain with the guard at the house, while the major and the teams went to the barn where the corn was stored and loaded it. The lieutenant halted the men in the road in front of the house, where they stacked arms and broke ranks. Inside the yard were several beehives, upon which the boys looked with longing eyes. Visions of mother's nice, light biscuit, spread with honey, rose from their mind's eye. The question was how to get the honey. One fella, more reckless than the rest, solved the problem by putting his arm around the hive, wrenching it from the stand, and carrying it through the crowd out to the road. The moment he raised the hive, a black stream of infuriated bees poured out from the bottom of the hive and immediately began a vicious attack on the boys, who ran in all directions, their arms working like sails of a windmill. None escaped ceaseless. The lady of the house, who stood in the doorway and saw the performance, enjoyed seeing the boys punished for taking her honey. On the 19th, we broke camp and marched past Burkeville Station and encamped near Nottoway Court House. It was a hard march. On April 20th, we broke camp and marched to Blacks and White Station. Our brigade was strung along the railroad for the purpose of guarding the same. Our regiment camped about 3 miles east of the station. On the 21st, we fixed up camp. The boys found some boards and made bunks. About the time we had everything fixed up to take comfort, we were ordered to pack up and move about 2 miles towards the station and relieve a battalion of the 91st New Yorkers. We bivouacked in a piece of woods. Everybody was mad and cross because we had to move so short a distance and leave our nice camp. Captain Kent left us to go to Wisconsin to join the 52nd Regiment. April 22nd, pitched tents and arranged camp. We had to patrol the railroad. Regiment held dress parade. April 23rd, Lieutenant Pointon was officer of the day. Lieutenant Holman relieved him, and he was ordered to take Company A and act as funeral escort at the funeral of Dr. Johnson, which was a nice compliment to Company A's soldierly appearance and perfection in drill. Regiment held dress parade and inspection. We lay at this camp until May 1st, performing routine camp duty and guarding the railroad, holding dress parade every day. On May 6th, we broke camp and began to march to Washington, 120 miles away. The regiment and Company A especially marched splendidly while passing through Richmond, where many of these veterans, accompanied by ladies, viewed the column while passing through. We marched about 17 miles from the city and encamped. The day was very hot. A few sunstrokes occurred. The next day, Sunday, we marched about 10 miles by way of Hanover Court House. The 8th, we marched to Milford Station. The day was exceedingly hot, and many suffered from heat prostrations. We thought it unnecessary to march men during such hot days after the war was over. At night it rained, cooling the atmosphere. On the 9th, we started out at 6 a.m. and marched to Fredericksburg, crossing the Rappahannock, and encamped. It rained in the night. On the 10th, we marched over Potomac Creek Bridge and past Stafford's Courthouse, where we halted for dinner, after which we marched within 5 miles of Dumfries and encamped. On the 11th, during a march of about 12 miles, we asked the natives how far it was to Alexandria. Each one made it the same number of miles as the one before him had. We began to think we were standing still as the distance grew no less as we approached Alexandria. We reached Fairfax Station and went into camp during a heavy thunder shower. The regiment was marching into a field and was in close column by the companies with muskets at right shoulder shift, bayonets fixed, when a heavy bolt of lightning burst over the regiment. The men swayed backwards and to the left from the blinding light. Their faces appeared a ghastly white, and the points of the bayonets emitted tongues of flame. It was an awe-inspiring scene. Fortunately, no one was seriously shocked. Company A got a wagon cover and fixed it up for a tent. We all got under it and went to bed. The rain fell in torrents, and soon there were streams of water passing between, over, and under us, wetting us to the skin. The wind blew the tent down, but we lay quiet beneath it. One of the boys had to go out, and in doing so, the cold air got under the tent and wet blankets and chilled us to the marrow. Early in the morning, we got up and stood around the smoky fires and tried to get warm and dry our clothes. It was impossible to do either. We rejoiced when the bugler sounded the general. We started at 7 a.m., marching through the station and Fairfax Courthouse to a point east of Munson's Hill, our old stamping ground of 1861 and 62, where we had camped. On the 13th, we got up feeling refreshed by the good sleep we got during the night. We rested in camp that day, feeling that our days of marching were o'er. On Sunday, May 14th, we moved camp to obtain better grounds. Captain L.A. Kent came back and assumed command of the company. He was looking fine, and we were glad to see him. On the 15th, we moved to a better location for a camp. On the 16th, we fixed up our tents and had company drill. Up to the 22nd, we performed routine camp duties, company, battalion, and brigade drills. On the 22nd, we commenced preparation for the Grand Review. Colonel Daly procured white gloves for the men. All our arms and accoutrements were made clean and bright. On May 23rd, 1865, we moved from camp at daylight, marched across Long Bridge to the Capitol, and on to Pennsylvania Avenue, where the review took place. Our brigade occupied its proper position in the line of the 3rd Division of the 5th Corps, our regiment at the head of the brigade. The boys marched splendidly while coming down the avenue in column by companies, and were cheered many times by the people who lined the housetops, windows, and sidewalks by the thousands. Standing near the White House and looking toward the Capitol, the eye caught a magnificent scene. That grand thoroughfare filled its whole length with the veterans of the Army of the Potomac. One could see the bronzed faces of the men, their muskets at right shoulder shift, and interspersed in the line were the commanders of corps, divisions, brigades, and regiments, and their staffs superbly mounted. Above them floated the flags under which they fought, bearing the historic names: Bull Run, Gainesville, South Mountain, Antietam, Fredericksburg, Fitzhugh's Crossing, Chancellorsville, Mine Run, Fair Oaks, Malvern Hill, Seven Pines, Gettysburg, the Wilderness, Laurel Hill, Spotsylvania, North Anna, Cold Harbor, Petersburg, Weldon Railroad, Reams Station, Gravelly Run, Five Forks, Appomattox, besides many others. And the enthusiastic populace cheered them on. It was a sight that will never fade from one's memory. On the 24th, Sherman's army passed in review. They marched in the same order that we did. At the head of each corps marched or straggled a band of foragers called Sherman's Bummers. Things of that character pervaded the entire line. They were a magnificent body of men and made an enviable record. But they lacked that soldierly bearing which characterized the Army of the Potomac. On the 25th, Lieutenant Pointon received leave of absence for 20 days and left us to visit his brother and family in Vermont. He rejoined the company at Jeffersonville, Indiana. The company performed camp duty and drilled until the regiment left Washington on the 17th of June for Louisville, Kentucky, going by rail over the B&O Railway to Parkersburg, Virginia, where they embarked on steamers and descended the Ohio River to Louisville, where they arrived on the 22nd of June and went into camp on the Jeffersonville side of the river. 10 Western regiments from the Army of the Potomac were organized as a provisional division under the command of General Morrow of the 24th Michigan. The 6th Wisconsin was assigned to the 2nd Brigade and was commanded by Colonel Dennis B. Daly and Company A by Captain L.A. Kent. There was a strong belief amongst the men that certain officers in our division were trying to have certain of the regiments retained in the service, the 6th Wisconsin being one of them. The men wanted to go home and were vexed because we were not mustered out. Also, at the inability of proper officers to procure blank discharge papers. The government supply had become exhausted, and the blanks could not be obtained through the regular channels. A very unpleasant state of affairs existed. Upon Lieutenant Pointon's return to the company, he went, at his own expense, to Camp Chase at Columbus and procured enough blank discharge papers to supply our needs. As soon as they could be made out, we were discharged, which was on the 14th day of July, 1865, and we started for home, arriving at Madison on July 16th, where we became the recipients of an enthusiastic public welcome in the Capitol Park at the hands of the state officers and citizens. At the conclusion of the ceremonies, the words of command were given. The bronze veterans wheeled to the right. Drums and fifes struck up their stormy music, and with guns at right shoulder shift and bayonets gleaming in the slant sunbeams, under the green arches of the summer trees, the last fragment of the old Iron Brigade of the Army of Potomac, bearing the rent and shot-torn banners on which were inscribed the names of such historic battles, passed on to dissolve and disappear from men's eyes forever. But to live immortal in history and in the memory of a grateful people. The men that composed Company A came from ranks of the people and left their several avocations to join that volunteer army of patriots that banded themselves together to preserve this nation, even at the risk of their lives. Many gave the full measure of devotion and lie on southern fields. Others came back crippled for life or disabled by wound or disease. A few of the noble fellows were spared to take part in the final ending and to see the restoration of peace. They laid aside the implements of war and returned to peaceful avocations as private citizens took their place amongst the workers and are helping to make this nation the greatest on earth.